While many hide behind the past, justifying everything that didn't happen because of everything that did. Keanu did the opposite. He didn't ignore his pain. He listened. He felt it. He carried it in his body and soul. But at some point, the world may never have seen, he decided that this pain wouldn't be the end of the story. Before fame, before movies, before applause, there was just a lonely boy with a suitcase in his hand and no certainty in his heart. He never had a real home. But today, his name lives on in the memories of millions. Born into chaos, abandoned by his father at age 3, Keanu spent his childhood bouncing from town to town, school to school, as if trying to find something he doesn't even know exists. A place, a route, a fixed point. But how do you build a future when your past keeps crumbling behind you? Maybe you grew up that way too. Not exactly the same, but with scars no one saw, feeling like you didn't have the same chances, as if life had begun owing you. And then comes the question that screams inside. Will I be able to break this cycle? Or will I end up like everyone said? If you've ever had this question, stay with me until the end. Because what you're about to discover might surprise you. Here, every story is a spark. Every video is a safe space to remember who you are, even when the world tries to make you forget. And this story, in particular, speaks to those who have considered giving up because they didn't receive what they needed. To those who grew up hearing that with this past, you'll never amount to anything. To those who carry, to this day, the weight of words spoken in childhood. And that hurt as if they were said yesterday. Keanu Reeves transformed the invisible into presence, absence into strength, abandonment into purpose, and silence, the silence many people find empty, into identity. He became living proof that the past can be the starting point, but it never needs to be the limit. What made this turnaround happen? What was the exact moment when everything changed? Even if no one noticed? That's what you're going to understand now. The truth is, no one sees the exact moment when everything changes. There's no soundtrack, no slow motion, no audience. There's just you and a silent decision. Sometimes made in your bedroom in the middle of the night. Sometimes on the bus, looking out the window. Sometimes in the middle of a conversation. When you simply realize, I'm no longer that version of myself that accepted everything silently. Keanu never announced his turnaround. He just kept going, step by step, with the pain at his side, but without letting it guide the way. That's how he began to rebuild himself, not from the outside in, but from the inside out. And perhaps that's the point that most connects his story to yours. The idea that not everyone needs to see it to know you're changing. Not everyone needs to understand. Not everyone will applaud, but you know. And that's enough to keep going. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what's touched you most so far. It could be a memory, a pain you're carrying, or simply that phrase that feels like it was written for you. Your story matters. And often, what you share here may be exactly what someone needed to read today to keep them going. Your participation. Here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this kind of content. When you like, comment, or subscribe, you're not just helping a video, you're strengthening a space where real stories are given a voice. And people who once felt invisible finally see themselves in something. So, if this kind of message resonates with you, click like, subscribe to the channel, and come join us. Here, each click isn't just a number. It's a sign that there's still room for content that transforms, provokes, and embraces. Now take a deep breath, because the most intense part of this story is yet to come. His father abandoned him when he was just 3 years old. And from that moment on, everything became a transition. Nothing was stable, nothing was permanent. Cities changed, faces changed, even the way we said hello and goodbye changed constantly. While other children were creating bonds, roots, and lasting memories, Keanu learned to let go of everything. To not get attached, to not rely on anyone for long, to live in a constant state of adaptation, as if being himself was always a risk. Imagine growing up like that, having to reinvent yourself in each new environment, learning to survive emotionally, even without a foundation, even without reference. He couldn't just be a child. He needed to be strong, flexible, invisible when necessary. The initial abandonment wasn't just a physical absence, it was an invisible mark of displacement. A constant feeling of being the outsider, the one who arrives later, the one who needs to prove himself, the one who doesn't belong. Maybe you felt this way. Maybe you still do. Not exactly in the same circumstances, but with that hard-to-explain feeling that everyone around you seems to have a place and you don't. That while others have certainties, connections, structure, you're there, balancing old scars with a socially acceptable smile. And this is the part of the story no one romanticizes. The part that doesn't make headlines, that doesn't shine on the red carpet. Because there's no glamour in learning from an early age to hide your pain so as not to scare others. There's no magic in being strong just because no one gave you permission to fall apart. The truth is, behind the scenes of greatness, there's almost always someone trying to pick up the pieces without even knowing where to begin. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there's a hidden truth to this journey that almost no one dares to speak. The impact of an unstable childhood doesn't fade with time, it transforms. Sometimes it turns into anger. Sometimes it turns into stonewalling. Sometimes it turns into an emotional shell, so well built that you don't even realize how much you're protecting yourself. Keanu spent his life building this kind of armor. Silent, discreet, efficient. But behind it, there was a child trying to understand why he wasn't worthy of permanence. The most impressive thing is how, even with all this, he didn't get lost. Or rather, he did get lost, many times. But he kept walking, even without a map. He continued to exist, even without a place to land. And that says a lot. Because true transformation isn't about becoming someone new overnight. It's about keeping going, even when the past insists on pulling you back. It's about making small choices that no one sees, but that gradually reshape your destiny. This story isn't just about Keanu, it's about all of us who have felt like we weren't enough because of what we've experienced, who grew up behind the scenes of other people's emotions, hiding our own pain to fit into the remaining spaces. And that's why honestly acknowledging your own journey is so important. When you understand where you came from, you can for the first time consciously choose where you want to go. If this makes sense to you, comment below. I'm on this journey too. Because, even if the path started out messy, there is still time to decide where it is going now. Because there's one thing absence teaches, and that only those who have experienced it truly understand. It forces you to search within for what the world couldn't offer you outside. Absence becomes a silent teacher. It teaches you to perceive what's unsaid, to see in the void a place to grow, to transform absence into strength. It's not pretty, nor easy, but it's real. Keanu didn't have stability, but he built presence. He didn't have consistency, but he developed depth. While most relied on external structures, a structured family, a steady school, lasting friendships, he was formed in the cracks, in the gaps between one move and the next, in the silence of rented rooms, in the time when no one was watching. And it was precisely this silence that shaped the man the world would one day applaud, without even imagining what lay behind him. There was no typical childhood. There was no traditional support. But there was something more valuable, an identity built deep within the soul. And that's what almost no one understands about certain types of greatness. It's not explosive, it's accumulated. It grows slowly, in the dark, like a root. When you have no one to turn to, you learn to be with yourself. You learn to listen to Your own thoughts, no matter how confusing they may seem. You learn to deal with pain, not by running away from it, but by allowing it to reveal something to you. Something that perhaps the noise of the world wouldn't allow you to hear, and that changes everything. Because that's where true transformation begins. Transformation isn't just about going from point A to point B, it's what happens in between. It's what you build inside when no one's looking. And Keanu is the living embodiment of this. A man whose depth was forged in absence, and whose strength came, paradoxically, from what was missing. This is the hidden truth behind many impactful stories. It's not always presence that teaches. Sometimes it's precisely the absence. The absence of affection that forces you to develop self-care. The absence of direction that teaches you to create your own compass. The absence of approval that forces you to discover who you are when no one is applauding. And it's curious to think how, even with so many emotional potholes along the way, he hasn't become bitter or indifferent. Quite the opposite. There's a quiet kindness in Keanu Reeves that's surprising, coming from someone who had so many reasons to shut down. This too is a choice. It's also a decision. Because when life pushes you to the bottom, you can choose to harden or deepen. In his case, it deepened. Every absence became a space for reflection. Every silence, an invitation to listen. Every shift, another step on the journey of self-discovery. This is the part no one sees when they look at the famous Keanu, but it makes all the difference. And maybe it will make a difference for you too. Because if you've been experiencing the discomfort of absence, of missing someone, of displacement, it could be that precisely there lies the fertile ground for the growth of something that no one can take away from you. Comment here. That makes sense to me, because sometimes, just recognizing that what you've experienced also has value is enough to start the change. And there's still more important things for us to go through together. There's a difference between being alone, and being educated by solitude. Keanu wasn't the kid in the photos smiling in the center of the room. He wasn't the chosen one in the games. He wasn't the popular one, nor the talkative one, nor the confident one. He was the one on the sidelines. The one who saw everything, felt everything, understood more than he could express. And this experience, which to many might seem merely isolation, ended up becoming an invisible formative process, a kind of silent school where one learns more about oneself than about the world. While others played at being seen, he learned to see. And that kind of gaze, born from the depths of solitude, is rare. It's the kind that perceives what lies behind words, that understands when someone smiles trying to hide their fatigue, that connects with what's subtle, with what doesn't scream. This sensitivity that Keanu carries today, and that so many people admire without knowing why, was forged there, in that seemingly empty but profoundly fertile space. Dyslexia made school a daily battlefield, not for lack of intelligence, but for incompatibility in pace, method, and language. While others were progressing through tests and essays, he was stuck, not out of laziness, not for lack of effort, but because the world seems to rush those who need time. But there too was a seed, the seed of patience, of solitary effort, of persistence without applause. And therein lies a hidden truth of many people's journeys. The most profound transformation often happens offstage, without witnesses, without an audience, when everything seems too small to matter, but at the same time too big to ignore. Keanu was shaped behind the scenes. While the world saw limitations, he strengthened something invisible, a kind of strength that comes not from recognition, but from resistance. From that silent resistance of someone who has had everything taken away and yet continues on. And what irony, the boy who grew up thinking he had little to offer became one of the most admired names in Hollywood. Not because he's the most flamboyant, but precisely because he's the most authentic, the most restrained, the most upright. And that carries weight. Because, in a world where everything is image, remaining whole is an act of courage. Some people need the spotlight to exist. Some people need silence to find themselves. And Keanu is that second type. The one who learned to listen to himself when no one else was. Who turned solitude into a space for internal refinement. Because, in the end, it's not about winning quickly. It's about sustaining who you've become, even when no one's watching. Perhaps you've also experienced moments like this, when everything seemed small, lonely, almost meaningless. But what seemed stagnant, perhaps was actually formation. Perhaps it was your time to take root. Of internal adjustments. Of decisions no one sees, but which change everything down the road. Comment here. This taught me more than it seems. Because there are things that don't need to be said out loud to make noise inside us. And there's more to this story that still needs to be revealed. Maybe the turning point was never an epic event. Maybe it wasn't a cinematic moment with inspiring music playing in the background. Maybe it was just a choice, one of those decisions no one sees, that no one congratulates. A silent decision that happens when everything seems to be falling apart inside. But you take a deep breath and keep going. The choice not to give up. The choice to continue. Even without applause. The choice to be kind, even though you've been forgotten so many times. The choice to trust yourself, even when no one else seems to. Keanu became who he is. Not despite his broken childhood, but because of it. It wasn't comfort that shaped him, it was the lack of it. It wasn't stability that gave him strength, it was chaos. His roots grew inward, and that's why they never wavered in the face of fame, money, or the tragedies that continued to befall him in adulthood. Now look at your own story. How many times have you also had to make invisible choices? How many times have you kept going, even without knowing if it would work out, just because stopping hurt even more? How many times have you looked around and felt like everyone was building something, except you? And yet, there, in the silence of your process, you decided to continue. Maybe no one applauded, maybe no one understood. Maybe you've heard more criticism than support, but you came this far. And that, in itself, says a lot. This journey you're on right now may seem confusing. It may feel backward, Maples's, directionless. But what if this very moment is the turning point you'll remember years from now? What if this seemingly stuck phase is actually the period where your roots are sinking deeper? Most people give up here. At that point where nothing is visible, yet at that point where everything seems like repetition. Wait, silence. But whoever understands that the invisible comes before the extraordinary follows. Whoever accepts that change begins in the dark, resists, and whoever decides, even without being sure, transforms. You don't need a crowd to believe in you. You have to believe that even with everything that has happened, you can still choose what comes next. You don't have to forget the pain you went through, but you can use that pain as building material, just like Keanu did. Because not everyone had a stable childhood. Not everyone had emotional support, or words of encouragement, but everyone can, at any time, make a new choice. A choice that does not cancel out the past, but gives it new meaning. That does not change what was, but transforms what will be. Have you ever stopped to think that perhaps your greatest strength lies precisely in the parts you've hidden out of shame? That perhaps what you've experienced, however difficult it may have been, is what makes you able to see the world with more empathy, more depth, more truth? There are people who shine because they were born on the stage, and there are people who shine because they learned to turn on the light from within. You know which side you're on. And just being here, listening to this story, is a sign that there is something inside you that still wants and can turn that key. Comment here. My turnaround starts now. Just so you remember later where everything started to change. If you've made it this far, it's because something in this video resonated deeply with you. Maybe it was the story. Maybe it was the way it resonated with your own. Or maybe it was just that feeling that, finally, someone had put into words what you'd lived silently for so long. This channel is exactly about that. About real stories, invisible decisions, and changes that start from the inside out. If you felt this content resonated with you, subscribe here to continue the journey. We'll continue diving deep into stories that weren't meant to entertain, they were meant to awaken. And since you stayed until the end, comment below. This message was for me. This helps us recognize each other around here. It helps create a network of people who, despite having different paths, share the same desire to transform their own path. Oh, and leave a like on this video if you somehow found yourself reflected in this story. Sometimes a simple click is just a click, but sometimes it's a sign that the message reached the person who needed to hear it. There's a video here that goes into more detail on this topic. Click and follow along. The next story might be more relevant to you than you think.